Hey everybody, I'm Jack Rita with Future Pastimes, and I'm a designer on the expansions for Gale Force 9's 2019 edition of Dune. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a situation you may find yourself in. And let's say you're playing Dune and there's 5 players. So with an odd number of players, when a nexus occurs, a lot of the other factions want to get into alliances, especially if they're in a couple of strongholds. And there's somebody else who is well-positioned either financially or with cards or some other element, but you end up being the one odd faction out. You're not in an alliance, especially if you were very open to the idea of being in an alliance, but the other ones got snapped up first. What is your best course of action in that situation? So you don't necessarily want to go it alone, and it's going to be challenging for you to win the game solo. Yes, you only need to get into 3 strongholds, whereas the alliances need to get into 4. But another way of looking at that is that each member of the alliance really only needs to get into 2 strongholds. So in some ways, it's a bit of a disadvantage. So what do I do in those situations? Well, the one thing that I do is bide my time. I know that if the other players can be prevented from winning, then what they're probably doing is weakening themselves. So by biding my time, I'm hopefully putting myself into position to be stronger, either to go for a win on my own or to become an ally in a future nexus. So biding your time should involve conserving your forces and not risking them unnecessarily, trying to go after spice blows, especially if the main focus of the other factions is the strongholds. And paying attention to the cards, trying to get the card knowledge. So when the other factions are fighting, you want to pay attention to which factions have the weapons that you know you can counter or have the defenses you know you can get past. It's not always going to be definitive. So you say, oh, they have a shield and I have a poison weapon, I should be good. They may have a snooper as well. You don't know for sure, but sometimes you can get card knowledge through bribery. Sometimes you're a faction that has card knowledge, so there may be ways to supplement that. But paying attention to what factions are winning the battle so that you know which cards they have is an important thing to do while you are biding your time. So building up your reserves, your forces, either in reserves or on the planet, either like in the Polar Sink is a great staging ground because nobody can mess with you there. And I also like to maybe try to get into one of the strongholds, especially Habanya. That is usually considered the least desirable stronghold overall. It's because has no income in advanced, and it's hardest to get to out of all 5 of the strongholds. Not that it's hard to get to. The Fremen can get there, but it costs them a shipment and a movement, and the other faction can ship there directly. But in terms of just getting there via ornithopters, it's not easy to do from most territories. So you can get to Tuik from the Polar Sink with ornithopters, and you can get to the other 3 strongholds very easily with ornithopters from each other especially. So Habanya is a good one to stake out and say, look, I'm the solo faction. If I can control that one, the others are going to be fighting over the other strongholds, which are easier for them to get to and more likely to have fights anyway. And controlling at least one stronghold will feed into becoming a better ally in a future nexus or for going for the solo win for yourself. So it's good to get on there somewhere, especially if you have a sizable number of forces in there and not a lot of forces in the tanks. So that's biding your time. But the other part of that equation can be making yourself a more attractive ally. And it kind of goes hand in hand. If you are getting spice from spice blows, if you've staked out one stronghold, if you've acquired some card knowledge, and you don't have a lot of forces in the tanks, what often can happen is when the alliances do go for it and they are thwarted, at least one of those allies in each alliance tends to be fairly decimated, which means that when a nexus does occur, they are no longer a very attractive ally. And that is a good opportunity for you to remind the stronger parts of those alliances that maybe they should drop their ally in favor of you. But if you want to go for the solo win, you do want to be positioned in a stronghold with a decent amount of spice, hopefully a good hand of cards, or at least a decent hand, and the reserves in which to use for that final go. And that final go, I think, is largely going to depend on turn order. If you're going to go very early in the turn, what happens is a strong faction that goes after you is going to have a relatively easy time dumping a large number of forces into your most vulnerable stronghold in order to prevent you from winning. And if you're going too late in the turn order, you often will be blocked from being able to get into 3 strongholds. So you're paying attention to the turn order, and when you've got a situation where you've got a lot of spice, you've got decent cards, you have decent reserves, and you're in 1 stronghold, let's say you're going 4th in turn order, that's a great time to say, yeah, I'm going for it. You ship into one of the other strongholds, especially with ornithopters, and move into the 3rd, and now you're in 3. You're going to be probably in at least 2 fights, possibly 3, but maybe not, because if only 1 or 2 players are going after you in turn order, then you've got a pretty good shot of being able to overwhelm the other forces, and the players going after you may not be well positioned to do anything about it, especially if you've been paying attention to who you know you have the best chance of winning a fight against. And maybe it's somebody that you have their traitor, or you know that they don't have very many good treachery cards, and they just don't have the forces to be able to outdial you. So that's my advice in general for what to do when you are the odd faction out. It's going to be bide your time, no matter whether you want to go it alone or become an ally later on. And then, yes, position yourself and then wait for the right time. Don't wait too long. You are going to probably have to sacrifice some of your forces, potentially some of your cards and or leaders, to prevent a win. You can't necessarily depend on the other factions to do it, because a lot of times what happens is if one alliance is going for the win, the other alliance, in trying to stop them, is also going for the win. They're fighting in 4 strongholds while you are sitting in Hibernia watching and hoping that one alliance wins 2 of those fights and the other alliance wins the other 2. That's pretty risky. So, and it's going to depend on which faction you are, of course, and what the other alliances are. If you've got Atreides and Bene Gesserit are one of the alliances, that's going to be pretty formidable. If they've picked up some good cards, they're going to have voice and prescience, which is going to be real tough to beat. Another alliance, it might be Harkonnen and the Emperor. So Harkonnen's got a full hand, 4 traitors ready to unleash. They may be capturing leaders. The Emperor's got the Sardaukar and probably also a full hand as well. That's tough as well. But if they're working against each other, you maybe can help that out, and maybe giving some card knowledge to a different faction at a clutch moment, just so that you can prevent that win. There's a lot of wheeling and dealing, and it's very risky, but the payoff is that the game goes on, and now you can strike after they have all failed. There are a lot of forces in the tanks. They've expended a lot of spice going for it. They've lost some cards because they've lost some battles. And you are able to swoop in at the last minute and try to pull up the win. So that is your best bet, in my opinion. If you have some other thoughts on that, let me know in the comments. Tell me any stories you've had where you were the odd faction out. Were you able to win it alone? Did you just become a better ally in a future Nexus? Pay attention to the number of Shai Hulud that come up, because sometimes they've all come up and another Nexus is not happening anytime soon. So you're going to have to gauge, all right, how long do we probably have to wait before there is another worm that shows up in the Spice Blow phase? So a lot of stuff to have to take into account. But for me, that's the beauty of Dune, is that it is not, there's no guaranteed right approach. You have to constantly change your tactics, and you have to try to look at the bigger picture, pay attention to a lot of what's going on, and try to get the other players working against each other as much as possible, and help out the enemy of your enemy when it suits your needs as well. Hopefully in the future we'll have new ways to address this sort of situation. That's all I can say about that. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.